Social media and even mainstream media has just been on fire for the last several days of all these rumors about Tucker Carlson being in Moscow. The question's been, what's he doing there? What's he going to do? Who's he talking to? Was he invited? What's going on with all that? And I mean, every little thing from, shots through keyholes in different shops where he was having dinner, and he was seen driving in an SUV. I mean, really, this one of the, almost like the Queen of England was spotted out somewhere or something. It's just been crazy. Well, a lot of speculation whether he was there to interview Putin or was he just there to meet with him. And a lot of people remember there was apparently some effort by the U.S. government to prevent Tucker from going to interview Putin earlier while he was still with Fox News. And just a couple of hours ago, Tucker Carlson himself put an end to all the rumors when he said this.
The war in Ukraine is a human disaster. It's left hundreds of thousands of people dead, an entire generation of young Ukrainians, and it's depopulated the largest country in Europe. But the long-term effects are even more profound. This war has utterly reshaped the global military and trade alliances. Most Americans have no idea why Putin invaded Ukraine or what his goals are now. They've never heard his voice. That's wrong. Almost 3 years ago, the Biden administration illegally spied on our text messages and then leaked the contents to their servants in the news media. They did this in order to stop a Putin interview that we were planning. Last month, we're pretty certain they did exactly the same thing once again, but this time we came to Moscow anyway. Elon Musk, to his great credit, has promised not to suppress or block this interview once we post it on his platform, X, and we're grateful for that. Western governments, by contrast, will certainly do their best to censor this video on other less principled platforms because that's what they do. They are afraid of information they can't control. But you have no reason to be afraid of it. We are not encouraging you to agree with what Putin may say in this interview, but we are urging you to watch it.
Well, I assure you, I'll be watching it because I want to know what he's going to say. But predictably, especially because Tucker is really a hyper separating figure where lots of people either love him or hate him. So, he's definitely going to generate a lot of media anytime he's in the news. And that certainly has been the case here. And Robbie Suave on the Hill, The Rising, has told us that actually some people are even calling him a traitor just for talking.
The number of people screaming traitor, Tucker is a traitor, on social media right now is significant. We haven't even seen the interview yet.
Yeah.
For going to Russia to interview Vladimir Putin, something journalists from mainstream outlets, from NBC and ABC and MSNBC and Fox and everywhere else have done this periodically. We could go down the list of people who've been interviewed, the Gaddafis and Husseins and Putin himself.
Putin's been interviewed on NBC and CNN.
Yes. It's common practice.
Yeah.
Others, like Patrick Bet-David of Valuetainment, he's like, no, I'm cool with it. I'm interested in hearing what he's got to say.
You know who's on my list of people I want to talk to this year? Maduro. Maduro's not a right-wing guy. I want to talk to Maduro. I want to talk to certain people who are hardcore socialists. I have certain people on here that I like to talk to. A lot of people would say, you would talk to him? You would talk to her? Yes, I'm curious, okay? We just did a podcast with Bill Maher. I enjoy talking to him. I wish it went a different direction, but I enjoy talking to the guy because it's to see why does this person think the way he does?
Now, partially, I can understand why some people would be upset because they're thinking, hang on, Vladimir Putin, the evil empire that invaded Ukraine, why would we want to listen to them? Because that's kind of been a thing in the United States. You don't want to listen to people you don't like. One of the biggest problems that we have, okay, all right, let me categorize that. We got a lot of problems, so maybe that's not one of the bigger ones, but it is definitely up on the list because it contributes to so many others if you don't want to ever listen to anybody besides your own team. The people who are way over on the left, they only want to listen to these certain outlets. People who are way over onto the right only want to listen to these outlets. And of course, all it does is it reinforces your negative opinion of the other side and reinforces you that you're right here. And it doesn't help at all to actually see a comprehensive picture. Now, if you're a person like most of the people who watch our show, I think you're interested in hearing a diversity of ideas because you want to either have your idea deepened, yes, I am right. I'm more convinced now than I was before based on what this person said because I disagree with them. Or yes, I actually agree with him already, and now that's reinforced my position here. Other times you're going, hang on, I actually thought it was like this, but it turns out it's actually like this. People who are open-minded and willing to listen to different views are among the most successful people in our country and in the world, for that matter. If you block out anything that you don't previously like, you deprive yourself of a lot of information. And of course, information and knowledge is power. It's a trite statement, but it's very true. So if you want to help yourself out, you want to have a diversity of opinion. We've had guests on this show, the British commentator not long ago that many on our channel didn't like because he was talking about the positions of the Russia-Ukraine war from the position of a lot of the mainstream media, where everything Putin is evil and everything Ukraine is good. And, we should definitely go this way, which a lot of people don't agree with. And certainly I don't agree with a lot of the things she said, but we had him on, we were respectful to him, and we wanted to hear what he had to say. So if anything else, it reinforced that some of our views are right. And we understand now why some people think some of the other ways, because they're only thinking in certain ways. And they also block out views like ours very often because they don't conform to their pre-existing conditions. But listen to me, it is important that we listen to things that we don't want, and especially Vladimir Putin. So that's one of the reasons I'm really going to be paying a lot of attention to what happens here, because, we have some clips of Putin that we played earlier today. I'm about to show you a couple more that are very important, but these are just little sound bites that we grab when he happens to be talking to somebody else. What we don't get is like an interview with him where somebody, especially from the West, gets to ask questions. Now, it remains to be seen whether Tucker's going to have softball questions or whether he's going to have some hard questions. I think he'll probably go toward the hard question side. I don't think he's going to just play it easy on Putin. I think he's going to ask him these questions, and I'm really eager to hear what he's got to say. There's a saying by the ancient Chinese strategic thinking Sun Tzu, who says, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you don't have to worry about the outcome of any battle. If you know yourself, but you don't know the enemy, then for every battle you win, you may lose one. If you don't know yourself or your enemy, then you're screwed. It's my rough translation. But the bottom line is we have to understand ourselves, and you got to be able to be willing to look at yourself honestly with an open eye and listen to even your opponents, even your enemies. And I'm going to show you why it's so important. It's not just some idea. There's some very practical reasons why. So if you had been paying attention at all to Vladimir Putin all the way back to 2007 at the Munich Security Agreement, the Western Security Agreement, they invited Putin because it was not long after the Soviet Union had fallen, and some people were saying, hey, let's bring Russia into the community of nations and integrate them with Europe, and let's bring him in to actually talk. While at the same time, they were actually looking to expand NATO further and further, which was working at contradictory outcomes. Putin made clear at that statement there that he said, listen, you guys keep going to the east with NATO, a military alliance that contradicts your claim that you want to integrate us in economics and in cultural and all this other kind of stuff. And that is a red line for us. He laid the foundation right then. The very next year, NATO ignored that. And they went on and they had the 2008 Bucharest summit in which they said Ukraine and Georgia would one day be in NATO. Well, Putin made very clear later that same year to where they had military action and limited military action in Georgia. And it was because they do not want Georgia or Ukraine into NATO. He was trying to send a signal if you're paying attention. Not many people did. Well, over the years, we continued to move the NATO further and further to the west. And Putin was again saying, this is a red line for us. Again, people ignored that, or they didn't even listen. They didn't know. And then prior to this war here, and I think it was either December 21 or January 21, I can't remember which one, where he said, listen, we're serious about this. We have a red line here. And if NATO continues to press up into Ukraine, then we're going to use military technical means to stop it, which he was implying when he had 200,000 troops around. He was telling anyone who would listen, there's going to be war. And then we find out from Jens Stoltenberg himself, NATO Secretary General, that privately Putin told him just before the war that he would not invade if Ukraine and NATO signed a declaration of neutrality, that they wouldn't come in. And of course, as Stoltenberg himself said, of course, we rejected that. And then we had war. So we didn't listen to Putin then. He had been telling us since 2007 where the red lines were. And at the 11th hour, he still gave an exit, but no one listened. Now, we didn't hear about that at the time. We didn't get to hear from Putin because that was a private message. But there have been some that have been very public, and they've been very significant to us. In September of 2022, Russia had just suffered its two biggest losses, its biggest setbacks of this war, when it was driven out of a large section of Kharkiv in the north, and it had to abandon Kherson city in the south. And Ukraine was riding high at that time because, as it turned out, those were going to be their two biggest tactical victories of the entire war. And man, NATO was flush with excitement, and they were talking about, let's give Ukraine even more stuff, and they were going to get ready for an offensive the next summer. And now people were legitimately saying, hey, maybe we can drive Russia out and actually militarily defeat them. In that environment, a clearly stressed Vladimir Putin said this.
Агрессивной антироссийской политики Запад перешел всякую грань. Высокопоставленных представителей ведущих государств НАТО о возможности и допустимости применения против России оружия массового поражения, ядерного оружия. Тем, кто позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России, хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф.
So you could see from his facial expressions there, he was very serious and he was very stressed. And that should underscore to everybody who was watching that then. It should have removed any doubt that anybody had. Even if Ukraine were to somehow have success and literally start physically pushing Russia out to where their military would be at risk of losing a war, that Russia would retaliate with at least tactical nuclear weapons. The chances that the largest holder of nuclear weapons on the planet would allow their conventional military be defeated, especially with all the help from all these 15 NATO and other Western partners, and allow them to be pushed all the way back to and possibly into Russia, and the chances that they wouldn't use nuclear weapons, he made very clear that he would. I'd say some of these things are between the lines. That wasn't much in between the lines. And that should have told us right then we need to change our policies, because if we think we're going for a Ukraine victory, that's suicidal for American interests, for Western interests, for NATO, because it could spawn a nuclear war, which would destroy everything we've worked to build since the end of the Second World War. So that's what, if we'd have been paying attention, we should have known then. We could have been working toward getting this thing solved then if we had been listening, but we didn't. And then, as it turns out, the summer offensive, it didn't work at all. And in fact, the Russians are now on the upper end. And so in December, just this past December, now that Putin is talking a little bit more about some of the way he wants to negotiate now, and just compare his body language and how much more relaxed he is in this one as compared to the first one you saw.
The first nuclear warheads have been delivered to the territory of Belarus, but just the first ones. The use of nuclear weapons undoubtedly is theoretically possible for Russia. We have more of these weapons than NATO countries do. They know that, and they keep telling us to start negotiations on reductions. Well, you know what? They can shove it.
See, now that he sees that he's starting to be on the upper hand militarily, and so now then he's getting a lot more cocky, and he's like, I'm not going to negotiate a reduction of superior nuclear weapons that I have. We're not going to do that, because he doesn't feel like he has to, either tactically or militarily. And then also last month at a separate venue, that he was talking about the possibility, even in this late hour, of having a negotiated settlement. And he says some key words here if people are paying attention. See if you can pick them up.
Мы достигнем своих целей, о которых вы сказали. Теперь вернемся к этим целям. Они не меняются.
Вот я напомню, о чем мы тогда говорили. О денацификации Украины, о демилитаризации, о ее нейтральном статусе. Теперь, что касается демилитаризации. Ну, не хотят договариваться. Ну что ж, мы тогда вынуждены принимать другие, в том числе военные меры.
The neutrality, the neutral status. That's the same thing he told Stoltenberg before the war started could have prevented the war. It's the same thing his negotiators said at the Istanbul negotiations in March and April of 2022 could have brought the war to an end there. He is still saying the same thing again now. Just like Putin said all the time from 2007 forward, that NATO and Ukraine was a red line for which they were willing to go to war, and he made good on his threats here. He gave NATO the chance, if you're paying attention, to saying, here's an out. I'm giving you an out. We can do this. And it could have saved literally hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian lives, and the devastation of entire leveling of cities could have been saved, but no one wanted to take that then. And even now, and in recent days, he's saying again the same thing. A neutral status is something that we can work with. We can start negotiating from there. So this war doesn't have to go until it's got a military termination. It doesn't have to go until Ukraine physically loses on the battlefield, until maybe their army breaks one day, and then Russia can take even more territory. It doesn't have to get to that if we're paying attention. That's what happens if you listen to people. And when you don't listen to people and you're not willing to look at yourself and you're not willing to analyze just the reality so you know neither yourself nor your enemy, then you have to fear every single battle. And folks, that's where we are right now. So Tucker Carlson is going to Moscow, and I don't think they've announced exactly when it is. I'll certainly be watching closely for that, and we'll be watching. I'm sure that we'll do an analysis once he's made that speech, and we'll kind of tell you what some of the things mean that may have been said in there. But I'm very hopeful that there's more information that Putin says about how we can reach a negotiated settlement to get this war over, to get the suffering of the Ukrainian people come to an end, and can finally start the process of having them try to rebuild their culture, which is already going to take decades of time. The faster we can get that done, the better for everybody. So when you're sitting there giving some consideration to, is Tucker Carlson a traitor? Tucker Carlson's not a traitor. Whether you like him or not, it's irrelevant. He's doing a job of trying to bring communication between two very antagonistic societies right now. We would do well if we listen to what's said. If you don't like something, fine. You don't like it. You don't have to, by no means do you need to like anything that you hear. You just have to listen. And if you're wise, you can say, is there any nuggets in there that we can use for our advantage? And then the second half, of course, we have to also be willing to recognize our own limitations and our own capabilities and our own strengths to see, can we find some way to bring this to an end that's as best as it can be for our side, but that's realistically possible. And that's what I'll be looking for when we see this speech. So be sure to tune in there. You could benefit a lot from it. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it. We are unintimidated and uncompromised for your benefit, as we always are and will remain so. You're going to want to tune in tomorrow. We're going to have Ambassador Chaz Freeman, you never want to miss him because he's always got some great insights, lots of contacts. And Harry Kazianis of the National Interest is going to be here tomorrow talking about is the North Koreans preparing for war. We've been talking about all these other war theaters so often. It's hard to, sometimes you miss that there's other things going on, and there's a lot of information going on coming out of North Korea, and you're not going to want to miss that. Tune in tomorrow. We'll talk to you more, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.